There's new feature-length drama here on ITV this bank holiday weekend. Rowan Atkinson sets a trap, starring as the famous pipe-smoking detective May Gray on Easter Monday at 9. Now before Emmerdale, the latest ITV News.
Terror arrests in Belgium, France and Germany as more plots are foiled. In Brussels, a man with a backpack is shot and arrested when he refused to surrender. Confirmed, Briton David Dixon died in Tuesday's outrage. We've the moving testimony of a man who survived it.
We were really close. I feel lucky to have escaped with what I did.
Also tonight, a Tory council leader tells Cameron to rethink academy plans for all schools in England. And satisfaction guaranteed. The Rolling Stones arrive for their first ever gig in Cuba.
This is ITV News with Alistair Stewart.
Good evening. Accused of missed opportunities and bungled intelligence operations over the Brussels outrages, security forces across Europe today upped their game. There were more arrests and claims fresh plots had been foiled. Here the Foreign Office confirmed 50-year-old David Dixon from Hartlepool died in Tuesday's explosions. More on that in a moment. But first, our correspondent Emma Murphy reports from Brussels on today's dramatic events.
Shot down on a tram platform, this is the man Belgian prosecutors say is a terror suspect who had to be neutralised. As he bleeds on the ground, a bomb disposal robot is sent in. To the obvious distress of those filming from windows above, police officers then approach and appear to coax a young child away from the man. Stripped of his coat and bag, he's then dragged along the platform into custody to be questioned about a foiled attack on Paris. Eyewitnesses described police and troops pouring into the residential area as explosions were heard.
I just saw all the police cars run away and close all the streets. I just hear one shot. I was over there. I hear one shot, like boom, that's it. But that's really scary.
16-year-old Komal Kaur saw police telling the man to remove what she thought was a belt, but was more likely a rucksack.
I heard the shoot when they shoot, and the man was lying down, and there was a machine, there was a type of robot, and it was on close to him. He had a belt around him, and he moved it, and he put it to the side.
The 3 arrests today follow a night of raids across Brussels and in Paris. Earlier, American Secretary of State John Kerry visited Belgium to pay his respects at the airport to the dead of 40 nations.
We will not be intimidated. We will not be deterred. And we will come back with greater resolve, with greater strength, and we will not rest until we have eliminated your nihilistic beliefs and cowardice from the face of this earth.
They are strong words, but spoken in a city now battling to get just a few steps ahead of those who seek to inflict harm. Emma Murphy, ITV News, Brussels.
David Dixon is the first Briton to be confirmed as having died in the Brussels attacks. His family said it was the most terrible and devastating news. Today, some survivors have been speaking publicly about their ordeal for the first time, including one American teenager who also survived a previous terror attack 3 years ago. Helen Callahan has more.
David Dixon's family had desperately searched for him, but today they got the news they'd feared. The British father from Hartlepool is among the victims of the Brussels attacks. He'd managed to avoid the bombs at the airport, and in the aftermath of the explosions, he even texted his relatives to say that he was safe and fine. But then he went to the metro. We now know he didn't survive. In a statement, his family said, "This morning we received the most terrible and devastating news about our beloved David. At this most painful time, our family would gratefully appreciate it if we could be left alone to grieve in private." In hospitals in Belgium, those who did manage to escape have been describing their ordeals. American Mason Wells was in the airport when the bombs went off.
I was actually conscious for all of it, and even the several hours following. The first blast went off over to my right, about 10-15 meters. I was in the back of the Delta check-in line. I remember seeing, fire in front of my face, and also kind of fire down by my feet on the ground, and we were really close. I feel lucky to have escaped with what I did.
Incredibly, this is the second time the 19-year-old's been caught up in a bomb blast. He was also in the crowd when the Boston Marathon was targeted. His injuries are life-changing, but he's grateful just to be here, knowing that so many others have lost their lives. Helen Callahan, ITV News.
Back live now to Emma Murphy in Brussels, which must, Emma, be a city living on its nerves tonight.
Indeed, but it is a city, as you can probably hear behind me, that wants to show a level of spirit, a level of defiance, and also a great respect for those who have suffered this week. And this service tonight, to mark the end of 3 days of national mourning, involves many of the emergency services who were there on that dreadful morning. But whilst these services go on, the work has to continue, because they know that these plots are constantly being developed, and the real challenge now is for the authorities here in Paris and indeed across the rest of Europe to try and get just a few steps ahead of those who really seek to do them that damage.
Emma, thank you. And the Pentagon says US forces have killed the second-in-command of the so-called Islamic State terror group. Abdel Rahman al-Kaddouli died during an American operation in Syria. US Defense Secretary Ash Carter said several other key figures were also killed this week during ongoing military operations. And 12 people have been killed in a head-on collision between a lorry and a minibus in central France. Officials say the victims were all Portuguese passengers in the minibus, which was travelling from Switzerland to Portugal. Here, another Tory councillor today condemned budget plans to turn all English schools into academies. Hampshire's Roy Perry has demanded a rethink of the policy. The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn says the reforms would shut parents out of decision-making. Well, our deputy political editor Chris Shipp joins me live. Quite an alliance of opposition.
Yes, Alistair, it is. And Jeremy Corbyn just made those remarks to the big teaching union, the NUT, at their conference in Brighton. You'd expect him to say that. What you wouldn't expect is Tory councillors in Tory shires to criticise this plan as well. We've spoken today to councillors in Kent, in David Cameron's backyard in Oxfordshire, and also in Hampshire. The leader of Hampshire said this is a mistake. It's like putting good schools into detention because of a few bad ones. And he says there's no evidence that academies improve standards. So why do it?
So I would say for those schools doing well, where the parents don't want the change, the school doesn't want the change, the governors don't want the change, is it really necessary? All this upheaval, all this expense?
The expense, Alistair, he's talking about there is £25,000 per school to convert to an academy.
They're going to blink?
I don't think so. The Education Secretary, Nicky Morgan, is giving a speech to the other big teaching union, the NES-UWT. They've got their conference in Birmingham tomorrow. She's going to restate her support for this plan. She says the money's there. She says it does improve standards. But again, we've got Tories criticising a Tory budget, and that didn't work out so well for Ian Duncan-Smith, did it?
It did not indeed. Chris, thank you very much. And finally, Cuba's communist leader, Fidel Castro, banned the Rolling Stones as decadent and dangerous. They quite like that. But tonight, both sides put all of that behind them as the Rolling Stones play Havana for free. And as Nina Nanar reports, Sir Mick Jagger has quite a treat in store for the tens of thousands of fans expected to attend.
It's only rock and roll, but in Cuba, this moment symbolises so much more. The Rolling Stones arriving for their historic concert in the communist country. No band this big has ever played here. And the four superstars whose music was once banned in the country had their Spanish greeting ready for the fans. It's a pleasure to be here, said Mick Jagger.
Es un placer de estar en Cuba por la primera vez. It's very nice to be here too. And I think it feels like history because, as you say, you know, they haven't had any
treading new ground.
Big shows before, and no, haven't had any big shows before, and it would have been surprising, say, 10 years ago for this to have happened, and anyone that's been here a long time knows that.
The Stones added the surprise concert onto the end of their current tour, a move unthinkable for decades. In the 60s, American and British rock music was outlawed by the Cuban government, seen as subversive, representing the worst excesses of Western capitalism. But now Havana is preparing for a concert by one of the biggest bands in the world, with an expected audience of 500,000, and all this coming just 3 days after the momentous visit of US President Barack Obama.
I think he made a very good impression here.
A great frontman.
Yes.
Cuba has waited a long time for a lineup like that. Nina Nanar, ITV News.
Keith Richards said Barack Obama a great frontman. Mick Jagger denied to confirm that they viewed the President of the United States as a promising warm-up act. I will be back with the late news at 10. Until then, a very good evening to you. Bye-bye.